Everyone knew her as Marcia. The paperboy came every day at 4, only 13, drove Dad's old DeLorean with one gull wing open. He'd throw the paper at the house, a slap against brick or wood or glass. They'd make slightly different sounds, depending. Marcia could tell the difference from any spot in the house. Folding laundry in the basement, she would cock her head. She was a neighborhood legend, had seemed ancient since the 80s, got out and walked at least a little every day, around the block, sometimes twice. It said she was a child in Berlin at the Olympic Games in 36. She saw Jesse Owens win gold and the crowd go nuts as Hitler remained seated. She punted a pit bull once. I saw this. It was charging her, made it look like an accident, wearing striped socks with sandals. So it just wasn't like her to not come get the paper. Neighbors saw the van and knew. The men driving had matted hair. When the sliding door opened, a styrofoam cup fell out. Some say her legal name was Mona Catherine Lisa, but everyone knew her as Marcia.
All right, thank you. Welcome to another edition of Poets in Montana. We're listening to Michael Earl Craig today, and Michael is the, what years were you Poet Laureate again, Michael?
Let's see, it would have been 16 and 17.
Yeah, okay.
I think 15, 16, 16, 17, maybe right in there.
There you go, yeah.
I think
and so it says here briefly on the back of one of his 5 books, Michael Earl Craig was born in Dayton, Ohio in 1970. He earned degrees from the University of Montana and the University of Massachusetts. He's the author of Can You Relax in My House? Yes, Master, Talkativeness, and Woods and Clouds Interchangeable. Are those all from Wave Books?
No, the first 2 books are from Vince Books.
Yeah, that's right.
Can You Relax in My House and Yes, Master were done with Vince, and then the others are with Wave.
All right. Well, cool. Well, welcome, Michael, and we've just been sort of chatting prior to this because we really haven't had a chance to have a conversation like this before. Even though I know you go back a long way in Montana at this point. When did you arrive here? Did you come here to go to school? Is that why you came here?
I did. It was the January of 1990, and to undergraduate English department.
All right. All right. So so you came here from, were you living in Ohio at that time?
I was living in Ohio. I'm born in Dayton. Yeah. And I'd been 2 years at Ohio Wesleyan, which is near Columbus, and transferred and lost, I lost a good amount of my credits in the transfer. So I kind of started over at U of M and did my undergrad there, kind of 90 to 94.
Okay. Yeah. Was there any, what sort of, was it just the fact that you could get in, or was it any motivation for coming to University of Montana, right?
Yeah. So what happened with that was when I was a kid, I had skied a little bit in the West.
Okay.
And I loved it. And then when I was at Ohio Wesleyan, I started reading Thoreau and then Wendell Berry, but eventually Edward Abbey. And I really became obsessed with the West then through Abbey's essays more than his novels.
Right.
And so I had a summer job in Colorado when I was maybe 19, washing dishes at a dude ranch. And just one of the wranglers or somebody who worked there was from Bozeman. And she saw I had a pile of books and I was always reading, and she knew I was interested in reading and writing. And she was suggesting I come up to Bozeman if I wanted to transfer. But then the more she learned about what I was interested in, she said, you should just go right to Missoula. I'd never heard of Missoula. And it was kind of before you just pick up a phone and start doing research.
Right.
But I eventually got all the material, read about Missoula, and I did transfer. But it was, I think it was Edward Abbey that kind of nudged me in that direction.
Yeah. Yeah. Abby had a big influence, I think, up here too, on several people in the university. And he came back quite a few times. I missed him. I was either somewhere else or and I heard stories about it though. And of course they were always great stories. He was an irascible old bastard.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, very cool. Well, so you got an undergraduate in creative writing, English, or?
It was let's see how that worked. I think it was undergraduate in the English department, an English degree and then you'd have a side major, if I remember right.
Right.
The minor
Yeah.
was creative writing.
Yeah.
My degree is actually in, I guess, English lit.
Okay.
Something like that. Yeah. BA.
But then, so you actually then at some point you went to Massachusetts,
Yeah.
and studied there, creative writing, or?
Yeah. Yeah. So after I took maybe a year and just did some other things, and then went to UMass in 95. And that was the way they run that. It's a 3-year MFA, and it was a great program. I met a lot of really people who are still great friends today.
Yeah.
And it was a good time. I enjoyed it.
Yeah. Yeah. And then, I mean, the other thing that like in your biography and that I know about you from just other people and from you when you were Poet Laureate is that you're also a farrier.
Mm-hmm.
Shoe horses.
Yeah.
And did that begin before you ever got out here, or was that born out here?
So that during those graduate years, I had summer jobs working for either out of dude ranches and then eventually packing for outfitters.
Yeah.
Both the Bob Marshall and the Wind River Range in Wyoming. And so while I was in graduate school, I took a horse trip on my summer off in 97, and I rode from Alzada in the southeastern corner up to, Broadus, Miles City, Forsyth, got onto Route 12 and came across Route 12 to White Sulphur, and then Lingshire Road up to Augusta and into the Bob Marshall. And on that trip, I met at least 5 farriers and a handful of veterinarians.
Mm-hmm.
And I knew pretty soon I'd be getting out of graduate school and I'd need a job. I'd need to do something for money. Yeah. So that's when it occurred to me, horseshoeing. I never had thought about it. I'd done some already working for outfitters, but it was really, in hindsight, it was very basic, pretty crude, no training.
Right.
But I met these professional horseshoers along the way. And so I immediately, almost right after finishing at UMass, I just drove to Kentucky.
Yeah. Yeah. Cool. Yeah. I have one of my nephews is a horseshoer, and he lives up in the Camas, on Camas Prairie, but he's about your age too.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. He's just and I imagine he'll be doing it till he turns into dust. He's
yeah. It's a good job.
Yeah, he fell in love with it, and I well, why don't we? Why don't you give us I don't know if you have anything in regard to that sort of world. I mean, I know you've horses enter into a whole lot of your work, but you have poems newer poems that you have kind of set aside and you're thinking about sharing with us. So whatever you've got, why don't you share another poem with us and then continue.
Okay. I will read, since we're talking about horses, I'm going to find find this one. Let's see. This one is called Jeepers. By the way, yeah, I have a pretty big ranch account with all the, and so I have like 55 horses' names all down, just on a list. And reading down a list of horse names is fun. It's very, some of the names are unusual, some of them are very common and standard names, but this is a horse named Jeepers. Let's see. Some horses won't drink if you're watching. You have to drop the rope and walk away. But Jeepers is not like that. She is too well adjusted. She lifts her head and lets water dribble from her mouth, a glimpse of tongue poking out the corner like a herniated bit of bubble gum. And while nobody likes flies crawling on them, Jeepers does not mind. If she weren't quaffing like this, you'd think she were dead. Only a dead horse allows a fly to crawl all over them. Jeepers has 7 or 8 on her face alone. Is she okay? She isn't even blinking and looks deeply up into the mountains, water dribbling from her muzzle. One fly in particular walks all over her eyebrow, if you can call it an eyebrow. Her heavy rope is soaked, also dribbling, and her tail hangs limply like a curtain.
That's wonderful. You know, I mean, she she definitely has a personality that you give her just through description. I know I have a friend who was an outfitter for quite a few years, and or he was a guide for an outfitter, and so I mean, he fell in love with mules. I mean, he fell in love with horses. He always was, but he definitely fell in love with mules, running pack strings, and would tell these stories about these personalities of these different animals.
Yeah, all the mules are, that's true. The mules they just take that personality up a notch or two, and they can be, the mules are almost like goats. If you've been around goats much.
No.
I mean, goats maybe even take it another bump up, but mules, I've had a mule that would eat my lunch out of my saddlebag while I was leading it. And it did it more than once. It could work buckles open on leather saddlebags and pull food out of you without you even knowing it, even though you were waiting for it. They're insane. They're pretty great. Yeah, mules are fun.
Really smart. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, to see this mule shaking a sandwich bag, with its head off on the side, and I'm thinking, how did you get that Ziploc bag with rubbernecking it over there off to the side, and now you're getting a sandwich out of there? It's strange, but they're like that. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
So.
Well, as I mentioned to you earlier when we were chatting before we started this, I had a chance to kind of go back into your older material and kind of read through to refamiliarize myself with your work. And one of the things, I mean, your work is just like that last poem, Jeepers or whatever, is so image driven, so visual, so detailed, that I mean, it puts us right there. And there's also this is that first book, and they're very, well, not necessarily dreamlike, I guess, but they're mysterious to a great extent. There's a lot that's unsaid in them, but the later, as I moved on more so, like when I got all the way to Woods and Clouds, it seemed like the humor kept increasing. To me, I felt like humor played a bigger role in your work as I got closer to that last book that you published, Woods and Clouds Interchangeable. Is that just me, or is that something you feel yourself?
I don't know. It could be. It may be.
Yeah.
I think there's there's a string of poems that run through that book that are lighter.
Mhm.
They're quicker, nimble, narrow-lined
Mhm.
poems. And I think that they pretty much keep pulling the manuscript back to a little bit lighter,
Mhm.
slightly jokier, irreverent place. So that could be what you're noticing is, I think it's every third poem that happens. That could be it. But yeah, I mean, humor is something that for years I tried to, when people would ask me about humor, I would try to pretend like it wasn't, really happening, or something that pretty much is almost always there. But I think it's just the way that I see the world. I mean, my parents sent out a bunch of paperwork. They were moving a few years ago, and they sent, like, here, paperwork, and in that were some things I'd written in junior high and early high school for English teachers. And I could just see, it was weird to see it, that I couldn't write without humor. I just can't seem to get anything done. It always goes in that direction, at least a little bit. So I give up. It's there. So
Yeah, it's very much a part of the work, and yeah, I mean, it's very enjoyable, and especially once you get into the book, because each book seems to have its own particular tone. And this one sounds very interesting. The poem you opened with and the Jeepers poem, are they from this latest manuscript that you're working on?
yeah, yes, they are.
What's
They're yeah.
what's the title of this book?
Title of this book is Iggy Horse. Iggy Horse. Yeah. Which is yeah. So it'll be it's basically I'm working right now. I'm in the Finland hotel in Butte,
Right.
and I've holed up here for the last couple days, and I'm kind of putting the boots to this manuscript. I've been, it's through a number of drafts, but I kind of need to turn it in here about next week.
Right.
So that's what I'm doing. And yeah, I mean, like with most of my books, I'll have a long list, well, 8, 10, sometimes 12 book title options that I'll live with for a while. And then some will get pulled off, and then new ones will come on, and then maybe I'll put one back in there, and some bubble up to the top. And Iggy Horse was one that has seemed to just it just hangs on, and I can't totally explain why, but hopefully it'll make more sense when people get a chance to look at the book.
Yeah. Well, it doesn't have, I mean, that's the beauty of it, is it doesn't really have to make sense. Iggy
Yeah.
Horse sounds like a good title to me. Yeah. Between just the horse poems and Iggy, and it's like when I still do poetry in the schools with kids, and invariably sometimes you start out, you're trying to get them to think more specifically and stuff, and so
Yeah.
instead of just talking about your dog, you start asking them, well, what kind of a dog is it, and what's his name, and what do you do together, and think about, telling us, and God, dog names are just incredible, right?
Yeah.
Horse names have got to be the same, I mean,
Yes.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, they come from everywhere.
Yep, they do.
So how about another one, another poem?
Yeah. Let me see here. I will. All right. Page. You find something here. Okay.
It's fun just looking at you, looking there, because we're looking in that room at the Finland, and we'll have to talk about that later too.
Yeah. Oh yeah. I love these rooms and the being in Butte. I've got a nice afternoon light streaming in here, so it's okay. I've got one. I'll read this one. This is going to be the first. I think it's going to be the first poem in the book. It's called The Train. I have a cheese sandwich in my briefcase. No one here understands me. The conductor makes his rounds, wants my foot out of the aisle, taps foot twice with clipboard, then smacks foot pretty hard. I need ice for my apple juice. They found a gas leak in the snack car. Cold blue rails take me toward you as unattended pugs roam car to car looking for something. Daybreak, I head for the dining car. They seat me with a stranger. He tells me he's 7, says he's an orphan. I order French toast with sausage links and a side of bacon. He orders the fruit cup with herbal tea, at which point his parents arrive, have been looking for him for an hour. His mother is stone-faced. The father begins to cry. The boy scoots over and pats the bench seat beside him. I can read another one. That's gonna.
Yeah, go ahead. And I mean, there was a long pause there because I wasn't exactly sure that was going to pick up again and take off again. But no, great ride on the train. Yeah, go for another one. Yeah, go ahead.
Okay, I'll read one more. This one is. Let's see here. Don't want to do that. Okay, I will read. Page 33. This is called Cowboy and Pirate. Cowboy felt logy, looked and acted logy, but according to his doctor, was just aging. Pirate wrote, "The crisis is now," and mustard on some lunch meat, then added cheese and lettuce and a hoagie roll. With over 100 candle wicks in the mansion, it was Cowboy's job to trim them. Pirate did rope tricks with his lariat, which grew increasingly stiff until it moved like taffy. At 30, Cowboy added an eye patch to distinguish himself from his colleagues. Today he sat steadying his hands. Maybe a couple calluses would suit him. Calluses are mental, said Pirate to Cowboy. Cowboy thought about this. Blood pressures plummet, but not lifestyles, read the paper's morning headline. Pirate reached over and circled it with his pencil. So calluses are mental, said Cowboy. Calluses are mental, said Pirate. I won't cast aspersions, said Cowboy. Pirate did not believe him. At noon, the niece arrived, bringing 3 tangerines in her mother's old fedora. So
I'm in this world now. You could probably just get away with reading back to back for the rest of the time. It's like anything can happen in these goddamn poems. It's like they just keep, yeah. I was gonna say, if you want to read another one, you can. It's hard to wrap my head out of that and then move on to something else because
let me see what else. I'll try to read some. I'll read. Yeah, I could definitely read another. Let me just find something here.
I have another friend that I'm going to send you a copy of a book that his stuff is different, of course, than yours, but it's similar to a great extent in that it is this ongoing sort of world of a personal world that is happening within the poem, and all these interesting things are happening, and his particular brand of humor follows throughout it too. I mean, it reminds me a lot of that, but it's so I'm going to get that to you at some point.
Yeah, I would love to see that. Yeah, it's so this one is called the half-packed suitcase. Um, the half-packed suitcase unsealed a series of talking points, of expungements verging on cannibalism. Was she coming or going? It reminded me of modern nuns in quilted pantsuits, cracking open ball valves on bottles of sleep gas, the nurseries instantly chilled, causing cradle rock. It reminded me that half the children in small towns across this country were out stapling propaganda posters to power poles, while the other half sniffed airplane glue in basements, their half-built biplanes waiting on paint-stained ping pong tables, on plaid ottomans, and in the scuzzy bottoms of wall-mounted utility sinks. It couldn't be helped. But in my mind, there was also a chance, as even a slug on a pearl hunt has that wheel of cheese chance, that shirtless Dusko pop-off doll and twill pants kind of chance. And I turned in my mind, as one does in the sun, and reached up and shut the light out.
There you go. Now you shut me down. You took me right out of my little humor bubble right there. Yeah. Wow.
Uh, yeah, it's fun. I enjoy putting books together. Um, yeah, I think I spend more time in the last few books than I did in the beginning with just thinking about if somebody does go from front to back,
Mhm.
thinking about it more than I used to, and so that's part of what I'm doing right now is making sure the order of things is good and or but it's funny because we put a lot of time into this, a lot of poets do, and you don't really know if people are going to do that or are they going to crack it open and read 6 or 8 poems and
And
never read anything else. I mean, but I always pretend that it's going to be read by somebody like me.
yeah, well, and that's I'm totally on the same page with you there. Exactly. I mean, and I don't know how other people go about putting things together, but I do the exact same thing because that's the way I like to go. Because I know it's like once I get one, a
Yeah,
new book, it's like,
yeah,
oh, I'm going to consume this, and sometimes I'll crack it open. But I'm buying it, I always do. I just crack it open and read, 2 or 3 one way and the other, and then maybe crack open and I decide, okay, yeah, I want this, and I walk away. But once I get it, I start from the beginning and I want to read it all the way through that way. And then of course you go back and read it again, and then you bounce around and do different things. But I do want to read it from beginning to end because just by the way I go about putting one of these things together, that's the way I intended it for myself.
yeah,
Yeah,
yeah.
totally. And it is, like you say, it is fun. It might be it's a fun way to it's just an extension of what I mean. I wish that I was a prose writer,
Yeah,
that I could write the great American novel, but
right.
that ain't gonna happen.
Yeah.
that putting a book together, that's as close as I'm gonna get, probably.
Hmm.
Well, so the Finland Butte. Uh, I mean, you were what? I mean, obviously, I mean, Butte is Butte, so I mean, everybody knows a little bit about Butte before they ever wind up in Montana, I'm sure. But is there anything in particular that drew you to Butte?
Uh, I'm not. I don't. I think just at one point I stayed in this hotel driving across the state
Yeah,
and just fell in love with uptown, Butte up on the hill Butte.
right.
Um, and like I think we had talked earlier about for many years I didn't know anybody in Butte, so
Yeah,
I'd come back and stay here, and it was kind of the closest thing to being in a big city and also being outside of Montana. It felt totally strange. I didn't know anyone. But then some really good friends of ours have moved into Butte, so I don't now. My time in the Finland is way down just because it seems weird to come hang out in this hotel when we have really good friends that have a nice house in town and we like to hang out with them. But yeah, I just something about it. Just walking down the hall to get a bucket of ice, I get a charge out of the building, and I think that I'm not alone. I've talked to other people. Well, it goes one of two ways. People either look at me and they'll say that, well, you're crazy. Why Butte? And they have the polar opposite thoughts about Butte. So there are those people, and then there are people who know exactly what I'm talking about. When I enter this building, it's there's a magic quality to it that I love. And when I was in Missoula, I lived in the Wilma building for a while. This would have been in the early 90s.
Right.
And when Ed Sharp was still alive and I could still watch movies through a keyhole on I think it was the third floor level, there was this door that was locked, but I could watch things like Hoffa through the keyhole. The Wilma has a very similar, maybe that's why I love the Finland. They're just, they give me a very similar charge. I love buildings like this.
And it has to do with the age
Yep.
and the feeling that there are ghosts.
Yeah.
Or there's a history that's associated with this experience.
You bet. Yeah.
I remember because you talked about being a farrier and to survive and write your poems in Montana, and my day job for years was moving furniture and driving a truck, right, which would get me around the state a lot and outside of the state too, for that matter. But one of the things I remember, I was on a move in Butte, and it was a BN move or something. So it was a company move, and so they took everything. I mean, they would, if there was 3 cord of wood, we would throw it on the back of the moving van, and they wanted to move everything, these guys, because the company paid for it, right? And so we were there. We were meeting another truck. We had to have a second truck, and so we were meeting this guy, and they sent him over, and he was just there for the summer, and he was a guy that came from I don't remember, somewhere back east, and but he worked back there, and he was older. He was older than I was, I think, probably at that time. But so he pulls into Butte. He'd never been there before. He was living in Missoula. I don't know how he got there, and he was there for the summer. But he pulls into Butte in that moving truck, and and we drive uptown. And because this friend of mine, we loved staying at the, oh God, now I've got to come up with the name. It's not far from the Finland, out by the edge of the pit, where the palm tree.
Yeah, I'm not going to know the name, but I know that.
Yeah. That motel, and we would stay there. And when we get there, whatever, he's like getting out of the truck, and he's saying like, "What the hell are we doing here?" And I said, "Butte, man." He says, "This is Butte." He said, "Jesus, this looks like the worst goddamn place in Newark that you could be." He was freaked out. He thought they're going to rob us blind here. He thought he was in the ghetto, somewhere. Yeah.
No, it's definitely, yeah, I love it. I love taking walks at night, just through the neighborhoods, and yeah, it's fantastic. So I wanted to, something you just said about your time in Montana. I've read somewhere that when you were in high school, maybe it said 1970, around there,
Right.
was your introduction to poetry with James Welch.
Right.
Could you tell me a little bit? I'm just kind of curious. What grade were you in, and what was that like? And where was he in his career? What anything? I'd love to hear about that.
I was a junior in high school, and I think it was the first year that the Arts Council had these writers in the school thing. Holbrook was a part of and there was a couple other writers that were involved in doing this gig, and they would go into the schools across the state. And it just so happened that our school booked James Welch, as the writer that came in to do this thing. And it was you volunteered to be in this workshop, seminar, whatever they called it, with this writer for like 2 weeks, so 2 weeks in a row, and you got out of an English classroom, and then you were going to study poetry with this guy. And it was like, everybody's down for that. I was into it. I thought it was super interesting. I was into drama and stuff like that, and reading and writing. And I was into poetry to an extent, but not really into poetry until after that. And so anyway, he shows up, and he was working on the manuscript for writing the Earth Boy 40, that only collection of poetry that he published. And so that's what he used with us, were all those poems, those poems that are collected in writing Earth Boy 40. And it was just like, Christmas Comes to Moccasin Flats, and In My First Hard Springtime, and Harlem Just Off the Reservation, all these poems about growing up in little towns in Montana, up on the High Line, from Harlem to Browning, where he grew up. And he just told us, the old sort of Hugo dictum, I guess, write about what you know. Tell us, give us a poem from where you come from and what's around you, and that kind of thing. And so that was his sort of, trigger for us to then do some kind of, because where I grew up was in Alberton, Montana, and it was an old Milwaukee Railroad town.
Okay.
Milwaukee ran right across the center of the state, right?
Yeah.
And so that's what he tried to get us to, to try to think about doing those kinds of things. And
yeah, that's interesting. That stop thinking about poetry or trying to write poetry and just get to a spot where you're writing from what that's that. I read that also in the same, it might be on a website of yours or something.
Yeah,
I think it sounds simple. It sounds like it should be obvious, but it isn't.
no, it isn't.
It's hard to do.
Well, especially, at that age, and maybe at that time. I mean, everything is evolving. I mean, I've been now teaching poetry in the schools to kids for over 25 years. And there's a ton of us out there doing it. And, so you've got generation of kids now who've grown up a whole lot differently than we did. I mean, Frost was like modern poetry. You got to a Frost poem somewhere along the line, that was like major. And that was like, 70 years old almost at that point in time when I was seeing modern poetry, but there wasn't a lot of it. But in the late 60s, early 70s, all of a sudden you had this newer sort of experience coming into the high schools, younger teachers and whatnot, and you were experienced to the modernists and these different things. And people started, I remember this one young teacher built her own paperback library in this little school classroom, and she filled it with, classic literature and poetry. And so, and a lot of it modern, people I'd never heard of before. Probably the best-selling writer, speaking of Montana experiences at that time, 1968, poetry, Brodigan.
Yeah.
All of that stuff. And then, of course, he launched into the short little fiction stuff, which was just an extension of what he was doing in poetry.
Right. Yeah. That'd be interesting. Yeah. Yeah. That'd be a heck of a first teacher to have.
Yeah.
And how old would, do you roughly, I don't have his dates, and I don't like, how old do you think he would have been? He would have been maybe in his like mid 20s.
Yeah, late 20s, about going almost 30, probably.
Late 20s or 30.
Probably 28, 27, 28.
That's what
Yeah, something like that. I think he was born in 42, maybe, or 41, somewhere close to 40. because I knew my sister was born in 43, and I knew they were close to. He was a little bit older than her, you know.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Nice.
Yeah. So yeah, he was a young man, and but he'd been around, and he was writing about things that we'd never seen, and writing in ways that were just different, mainly because he was giving us that native American point of view from two different angles, from that Grovon and the Blackfeet experiences. And then
Mhm.
I think one of his family members had a bunch of probably Irish and Scottish, and we're
Yeah.
all mutts, kind of, not all of us, but most of us.
Mhm.
Yeah,
Yeah.
so that's kind of how I got introduced to the world of poetry. How did you
Yeah.
get introduced to the world of poetry?
Well, for me, it was, I thought I wanted to be a journalist. So I studied journalism as a freshman in college. And um, actually, I think I took a lot from that, just economy, I still remember those exercises where they'd give you a big block of text and cut it in half, but don't lose any information.
Mhm.
Then cut it in half again and don't lose any of that key information. And we just did these exercises all the time for
Right,
journalism. But so that was valuable though. That's actually, there's some of that going on with poetry when you're the crisp kind of compacting language and getting to the center of things.
right,
Then I thought I wanted to be write essays, and I took some classes where I really got into essay writers, and I had some great teachers. And then eventually it was fiction, and I started writing fiction. And only after that did I, teachers just kept pushing me, say, that reminding me or telling me that I really wasn't producing any fiction. I was writing poems. I didn't seem to be interested in dialogue or plot or any of that. And so, but that's how it was for me, is it just kind of came around. I think Raymond Carver, I loved Raymond Carver. Somebody asked me if I'd ever seen any of his poetry. I had not. I went to Freddie's Feed and Read, I believe,
yeah,
and got a Aquamarine and
right,
started reading that. And it was that I think was one of those, yeah, those first, one of those first books
right.
that I loved.
Yeah, I felt that way about Carver too. Yeah,
Mhm.
I think, and like Harrison too, Jim Harrison. I think Carver, Harrison, those they were first and foremost poets
Right.
who then wrote narrative, longer stuff too. But
Mhm.
they really had that feel of a poem. And and I watched that a year or so ago. I don't know if you saw that the Hemingway thing that Ken Burns did. Uh,
Oh, I
speak,
did. I
speak,
did.
Speaking of journalism
Yes.
and that sort of paring down thing,
Yeah.
I remember later on, after I'd read whatever I was supposed to read and did read and whatnot, all of Hemingway stuff. Uh, I was never a huge fan of the longer stuff,
Right.
of the short stories. I loved those short stories, and I thought they worked like poems.
Yeah.
They really did. Some of them were so short they were just like a poem, sort of,
Mhm. Yeah. Yeah.
because that was what he was best at. I think was paring down and
Yeah. Just that the economy, everything mattered. And that documentary, you know, um, shows you that. You can see him when he was really at it and kind of functioning at it at his peak. That's what he was doing. Is yeah, the time that went into that is pretty impressive.
yeah, yeah. Well, what else? Want to read another poem?
Sure. Yeah. Let me see what I've got here. This is another one. Um, I will read. Let's see here. I'll read a very short one first, and then this one is called Underfoot. The forest floor feels almost spongy with twigs made from decomposing pianos. Frogs relieve themselves on bark. A toy dugout canoe carved by the unknowns comes down the river. We watch it. It takes forever, seems to be stalling. One of the things I love to do, and I really do enjoy short, very compressed poems that don't try to, well, what I call the longer poems, I call them wall hangers, kind of like a painting or something bigger that's designed to stand alone better. But one of the things I love about putting books together is I can use all these smaller, more fragmented, maybe more mysterious poems and have a home for them, and they become part of a landscape and so this book that I'm working on now has a number of those. This next one I'll read is not one of those. It's a little bit more to it. It's near the end of the book, and it is called Walking Along the Tiber. I'll just read two here. The first one is The Wishing Well, and then I'll read the Tiber poem. The Wishing Well. When they drained the town well, they found over 40,000 old tires, hundreds of library books, 9 baby buggies, and a manual typewriter. There were no coins. The tires were carefully removed and tossed into the bay for safe storage. An unmistakable voice was coming from a tree. We both looked at each other. We knew who it was. Does anyone happen to have a pair of tweezers I could borrow? A dime has fallen into my piano. We patted ourselves down, each of us did, for maybe 2 minutes, thinking, wait, do I? Then I patted you down, checked all of your pockets, and even where you had no pockets. And you in turn patted me down, front and back, at times a little roughly, saying things like, tweezers? And any tweezers there? But none of this is crucial to the story. When they drained the well, they found a rusted pistol, which was revealed to be a toy gun at the exact moment that a second toy gun turned out to be a loaded Glock. Then they stumbled upon a very old set of men's parallel bars in the woods at the bottom of the well, which still felt remarkably solid. And then I'll read this other one. This is Walking Along the Tiber. I spent a little bit of time last year in Italy, and there are a number of what I call Italian poems that ended up in this manuscript. This is one of them. This is called Walking Along the Tiber. It grew quieter and quieter the longer I walked. A blue heron watched me, and feral cats darted into bushes, looking cross-eyed and scrawny. The road turned to dirt. Old men played cards in groups. The younger men sat alone in lawn chairs, under umbrellas, fishing for asp and common barbels, slingshotting maggots over murky water. I kept walking. There were the sky blue eyes of a broken doll in matted grass. There was a trampled turban and what looked like a busted off stiletto stuck in mud. I continued along the road. It got narrower, turned into a footpath. A rich mineral smell wafted in from what might have been the center of all mineral industry, which was when I came across it, a canvas hug tent on the Tiber. I pulled the flap back and stepped inside, and straightaway hugged was I, by different people of different ages and genders, some hanging on longer than others, sometimes two at a time. An older man hugged me hard, his face against mine. He looked through me at the big nothing in the woods, and I let him.
Wow. The hug tent. And the woods keep moving in and out of your poems too, I think.
Yeah, I think there are a lot of woods and rivers.
Yeah, and you open certain things up and the woods are in there, you know. It's like that those kinds of leaps, that magical realism kind of stuff that enters in and into a lot of the poems. Yeah, it's I look forward to seeing the book, man. It's there and I, you know, that like you mentioned, that one short poem, those sometimes little dinky sort of double haiku looking type versions of a poem, they work as great pauses or bridges, or it's almost like a dance back to the construction of the book again, in a way that one thing leads to another, you know, one train leads to another.
It's always fun when there'll be a magazine or a journal that's willing, when they want to publish a handful of those, because a lot of times when sending things out, I'll pause and I won't send some of those out because I'll think, well, I should try to land these little bit longer ones that seem to be more ambitious, if that's even the right word. I don't know if that's the right word, but I love it when a journal will say, "Oh, we'll take 3 or 4 of these or 5 of them," and they want to run those.
Right.
But also, I love seeing those in other people's books. So this isn't just this original idea on my end. This is a type of poem that I love, and you know, these short poems that fire a couple times and then dissolve and they're over. And so maybe that's a better way to look at it. I love to see those coming from other poets.
Yeah, and I think, you know, I mean, a lot of times I'm just thinking of a couple of short things like that that I saw here over the last couple of days going through your work in the past. They're not a lot unlike certain parts of longer poems. It's just like the rest of the context is stripped away and you're just left with this one little image turn and boom.
Yeah. And sometimes I don't know if I mean, I think a lot of poets might run into this. I'll be curious to see if you have these experiences where I'll write a longer poem and something, you know, I like it, but I'm not completely sold on it. I live with it for a while. I set it aside and I'll come back later. Or sometimes a friend will suggest cutting the bottom 85% off, or going into the center and taking something out. And I'll see something that is so much more interesting without all the other material. Right. And sometimes I'll have a short poem and I'll try very hard to make it longer and break it. You just break it. And so after, you know, a number of drafts, I'll just back up again, maybe a month or 2 passes or a year, and I'll look at it and I'll just return to where it was. Whereas other times, something small naturally turns into something a lot bigger. You know, you can't really always pick what's going to happen to those, but so I think there's some,
I've heard other people say, you know, that you know, great teachers, a line that great teachers will use, and it's a safe bet to use this line to say something, and then you know, it's like, what's next, or isn't it's like, is it done yet? You know, that kind of a line, just to get people to, you know, go back and rethink it and see if there's something else that needs to be said or needs to be done with it. But I think it's sometimes harder do the first part, like it's harder for you or harder for me to recognize that nugget of a poem embedded in a longer
Right.
piece of writing. And it's a lot easier maybe for someone from the outside to see that,
Yeah.
say,
Oh, yeah. Good.
it is right there.
Yeah, I mean, at first it hurts, right? When someone's like, chop this off. I can think of a couple good examples where a friend of mine has done that, but you just live with it, sit on it for a day or two, a few days. That's fascinating. In the very beginning, my response is no way, typically, and you live with it, and then you realize, this is what I think is so great about writing in general, is with just a click of a mouse or erasing, swipe of a pen, you can radically alter a piece of artwork in seconds. And there's no money spent. It's not like we've just shot 3 weeks worth of film footage in some town and we have a whole bunch of people and time spent.
Right.
No, with poetry, you can feasibly go in and ruin a perfectly good poem in 30 seconds. So that's the great thing about it,
A lot of it's been done.
Whoops.
Well, I'm trying to get an idea of, I think I'm looking at my clock on the wall here, and we're probably getting fairly close to an hour.
You bet.
And
Yeah.
Is there anything else that you want to share or say or anything?
I think I'm good. I could read something else, or we could
Yeah. If you want to read something else, and then we'll come back and wrap it up. And
yeah. Okay. Let me pick something else in here. This last poem I'll read is. Let me get to it. It's called "Preparing to Paint the Body of the Dead Christ in the Tomb."
That's a good Easter poem.
What's that?
It's a good Easter poem.
Yeah, actually, I hadn't really thought about that. It is Easter.
Recording on Easter.
Uh-huh. Okay, if I can find this here, page 23. Yeah, okay. So this is there are a few ekphrastic poems in this book, and I love to do that. Most of this is a painting. I'll tell you the painting ahead of time. It's called "The Body of the Dead Christ in the Tomb" by Hans Holbein the Younger, painted in 1522. And you should Google the painting. It's a stunning painting. It's a long, narrow, like coffin shaped, lying on his side, painting of the Dead Christ in the Tomb by Hans Holbein, painted in 1522. Wow. And this is a painting, by the way. I won't spend a whole lot of time talking about this, but Dostoevsky was floored by this painting when he saw it in person, and some accounts say that he had kind of a nervous breakdown right after. I don't really know. Who knows what happened, but it's a great painting. So instead of describing the painting, I'm describing what would have led up to the painting for Hans Holbein, and it's called "Preparing to Paint the Body of the Dead Christ in the Tomb." Did he think of himself that way, as Hans Holbein the Younger, standing yawning in the mirror? He looked a little longer than usual, then built up his bowl of pearled foam and began to shave. He'd ordered a corpse. It was on its way, fished from the Rhine, and he'd asked for a ripe one. There was a horse, a horseman, a long rope, a corpse hauled onto the riverbank, a running bowline tied casually around an ankle. The long rope then tied to the saddle with a gentle word or two for the horse. A dirt-caked Frisian named Samuel, who misunderstood and began galloping. As Hans shaved thoughtfully beneath each nostril, the horseman left standing at the river. This Samuel ran as only a confused horse could, up the wet stone road, into and through town, dragging the tethered corpse, which leaked water and banged disturbingly on the corners of buildings. It went on for a while. And because we believe in poetry and uncanny timing, it was precisely as Hans arrived downstairs and stepped out onto the front stoop that this Samuel showed up in a dash and braked a kind of sideways hockey stop, which brought the corpse around nicely, albeit abruptly, to the bare and bony feet of the clean-shaven Holbein.
Wow.
So the thing of that is that I think years ago I remember reading somewhere that a lot of these painters, when they wanted to paint the human body, whether they were living or they would get corpses. There were typically corpses floating in a lot of the rivers,
Right.
and I remember that from, I don't know, a long time ago, maybe not even pertaining to Hans Holbein. But then when I saw this painting and started reading about it and reading about, other people's responses to it when they saw it in person, the first question, the thing that popped into my mind was, well, he probably had a model, and he probably, that's how the poem took off.
Right.
But yeah, that idea of just of fishing bodies out of the river so that you'd have something to practice painting is kind of fascinating.
Right. And the line early on that he hoped it would be a ripe body or whatever, and then as he's shaving, and then your image there at the end when that thing arrives at his feet and is clean shaven, and just that sort of contrasting of this whole thing. I look forward to seeing the painting.
Oh, yeah. I mean, I love to look at it on just a computer screen, but I can see where I think what I've read about it is it's the width of a coffin, of a tomb.
Right.
It's the width of a human body, just laid out on his back, and it's got to be stunning to look at.
Yeah.
And then you start reading about people who have looked at it, and I believe it is Dostoevsky is the most. I think what I'm remembering is The Idiot was based on that painting features prominently in The Idiot. Okay. And then his wife, after Dostoevsky died, his wife weighed in and wrote about that day. And so you can find all this online, and it's part of me kind of geeking out a bit when I was working on this poem.
Right.
Is all that fascinating stuff surrounding this painting, and just to walk in, and it's painted in 1522. It's a stunning thing to look at. Yeah.
So you probably do and just in reading through your work, it's full of a lot of those kinds of, historical situations that you've done your research on. And then a lot of times they're short mentions. It's just a lot of times we're just listing of names in a process of developing this idea of these people, but the ones that are more detailed, you've done your research, I'm sure.
I mean, it's light research.
Yeah,
I can't.
Enough to fire your imagination.
Like this one, the more I don't know how I came across the painting, but this one it does. You start to unpack it, and then it's hard not to read more about it. Sometimes, I don't know if you're this way. Sometimes I'll read up about a subject to go down that rabbit hole for a while, and then none of that makes it into the poem, but it's still important, I think, somehow.
Just feeling like you have a sense of who this person or whatever figure was in a way.
Yeah. And that whole thing about cleaning up cadavers and bathing them and shaving them. There's a scene in The Power of the Dog, the Jane Campion film, at the very end. I don't want to blow it for some people, but there's a scene where a body is being prepped at the morgue, and when I saw that scene, it's just it's powerful. It gave me goosebumps a little bit, and then there's the Rilke poem, Corpse Washing, and just things like that. And in this case, it's not, we're just going to pull this thing out of the river and try to get it up to Hans's place in one piece. And there's a miscommunication between the horseman and the horse. And so it's not quite as reverent. There, it's a little goes south fast.
Yeah, yeah,
As things do with horses. Yeah.
yeah, totally. Well, this has been a delight, man. It was a pleasure to do this, and thank you for doing it.
Yeah. Thank you for inviting me and chatting with me here in the Finland.
Yeah, exactly. And listening to a few poems, and we look forward to Iggy Horse.
Yeah, it should be. I'm hoping it should be coming out this coming year sometime. Yeah.
All right.
So, all right. Well, thank you again.
Good to see you, Michael,
All right.
Craig. See you next week, folks.
All right. See ya.